Hi everyone, I wanted to take a moment to talk about my follower setups that I've been making so far in season 25. I get a lot of questions about these and why I'm using certain things, so I hope that this will clear things up a little bit here for people that might not be fully aware of how certain things work on the followers, and maybe it will help you to improve your own setups as well. So this is my monk right now, my inner monk that I have cleared GR 150 with. I've also been farming 140s, 150s with this. And the follower obviously plays a bit of a role depending on how you build it exactly. So there are a few tricks that you can use to make them better and more impactful. And there are like these standard items that you have on basically every single follower setup anyway, which is the Flavor of Time, which emanates. Then there's the Nemesis bracelet that emanates, and obviously the Oculus ring. So these are kind of like the core 3 items that you will essentially always have in every single follower setup. Maybe you can drop the Oculus ring into the 16 setup because there you don't really care, but the other 2 items will definitely be there. And I also have the Broken Crown here, which emanates because of the huge shortage of regular gems this season for your Augment gems. So keep in mind this only works when you have a normal gem in your helm, so you can't use a soul shard if you want to make use of this. So typically in my T16 setups, I am just removing my soul shard and running a Flawless Royal Diamond or something. And like this I will get more gems. This is especially important for puzzle rings or rainbow goblins and stuff like that. So make sure you do this in order to get enough normal gems so you can actually use all your augments at some point. So this can be really a drag to grind them up, and do not let this go to waste. Then there are the homing pads. You don't really need them, I would say, most times, but this is definitely nice to have them. So if you find a good roll, just put them on the follower as well, because this allows you to TP out. Especially useful in hardcore, I guess, where you can usually TP to safety when you are in some tight situation, but I haven't really used that very much. Other than those items, there are actually not a lot of items that do work on the follower. So I have a lot of random stuff here. For example, Stone Gauntlets, it just doesn't proc. A killer doesn't do anything. I have a Pox Waltz here for no particular reason, just because it has good stats. So I have a Thunder Fury here. This one helps with slowing enemies. But in some cases you actually do not want to slow enemies on certain push builds where you want to kite enemies really well and stuff like that. But typically I put the Thunder Fury there, also makes boss fights easier and stuff like that. Another option would be something like Azure Wrath for freezing. And I also have the Boots of Disregard that actually do work on the follower and give them 40,000 life regeneration most of the time at least. The reason why I care about this is because I have the All Skills relic here. So you see I try to make her tanky, because she has an esoteric alteration, she has a mutilation guard. Those are the only 2 legendary gems that work on the follower. So you want to level them to 100 and then have an all skills relic if you can make a setup that makes her survive. And that is actually quite hard to do. So as a general rule of thumb, you want to only do this when you have an enforcer in your setup. The enforcer's 90% less damage taken actually works for your follower, and that is kind of the enabler to have your follower survive, at least in a push scenario. There are definitely builds that go fast enough and just destroy speedruns in a fast pace, so that your follower will usually not get hit very much, and you could try to go without enforcer in speeds at least. But for the most part I do not recommend that, because sometimes your follower will just get wrecked and then you click a pylon and you don't have flavor, you don't have nemesis, it feels bad. And the advantage in speedruns is kind of low compared to pushing. Luckily, a lot of the top builds in the game are actually using Enforcer right now. So there's the Inner Monk, there's the Marauder DH, there are the Witch Doctor, Arakia and Zunimasa builds. So there's definitely a few things where this makes sense to try to make a tanky follower so they can make use of all skills, or potentially even the cooldown relic. So the Scoundrel has this Night's Veil ability that gives you 100% crit chance, and with a cooldown relic you can cast it once every 15 seconds. For 4 seconds of uptime of 100% crit chance in a pretty large area. So this is typically what you want to go for there if you're trying to make a tanky Scoundrel. And the Templar also has this heal ability with 30 seconds base cooldown, and then you can give him the cooldown relic, stack up cooldown on him, and you can have a 400k heal or so every 5 seconds, which is pretty massive life per second. So these are the main use cases of the relics that do not grant invincibility. But as I said, this basically only works with a pretty juiced up follower and with an enforcer on your build, unless you are doing speedruns. So you see, I tried to stack a lot of vitality, intelligence, of course. You need to get your follower to 25k main stat, And I also have 8,000 dexterity here, so I actually put on some dexterity gear, and then I decided to augment some of those items to get back the intelligence that I needed to make her more tanky. So typically on the Enchantress you get a 25k int, and then you stack a bit of strength or dex for armor, and on the Templar or the Scoundrel you do it with intelligence instead. So you get to 25k main stat, and then you try to get as much intelligence as possible to make them survive. You see, for example, my Enchantress has 5,400 physical resistance, gives her almost 94% damage reduction, and this is the damage reduction from armor here, which is 81%. So this could obviously be improved if I put even more augments on it. But you see, her toughness is 362 million, and then you have to multiply this by times 10 from the Enforcer, and that puts her to like a comfortable 3.6 billion toughness, which is way more than my own character. So around this number is kind of comfortable to make her survive. I think so far I haven't clicked any pylons where my follower was actually dead. So you can see her take some damage, but she does heal quite well because of a lot of life per second and a lot of life per hit. You can see those stats here, for example, life per second is 122k with fully stacked boots at disregard. Her life per hit is 69k, that's pretty nice. And I also put, for example, a soul shard with an attack speed roll here. So this season in particular, this helps a little bit to just make that a bit easier, I guess. Same with the helm here. I put an intelligence soul shard. You don't really profit from the other stats very much, maybe the life percent. But yeah, the soul shard effects don't actually work for the followers, but the stats work. So this makes it a tiny bit easier. Another neat addition is also the Roger's Huge Stern, which works on the follower. So yeah, as I said, there are a few items that do, and that allows you to help them become more tanky and survive more. Most importantly, you need to stack recovery on them and damage reduction, and not so much vitality. You see I have 13,000 vitality here on my Enchantress, which is actually quite a lot. So for example, I have the gloves here, I have the shoulders, I have the chest. So a few items with vitality is totally fine, but generally it's not really a great start for your follower. Instead, what you want to stack is just raw damage reduction and maybe a bit of vitality, but you can easily get away with maybe half of this vitality value. And you have to keep in mind that all their main stats are multiplied by times 2.5. So when you have like a 1000 vitality roll, it's actually 2.5k. Same with intelligence and strength, etc. So this is also why these augments are so powerful. So when I put like dexterity augment on her, she'll get 625 dexterity, and that will be multiplied by times 2.5, so it's like 1.5k or so, and that is straight up a lot of damage reduction from the armor that she's getting. I actually didn't invest too much into this follower here in terms of augments. I think she only has 2, but generally, yeah, you need pretty good gear and then a few augments or so with an Enforcer in your build to kind of make this work. On the Inner Monk it's a bit easier than on other builds because you also have the mantras, and you give your followers some damage reduction through that and some life regeneration and these kind of things, so that obviously helps a little bit. On some other builds that might also be a bit easier depending on what you have in your setup to crowd control enemies or maybe bring defensive buffs to your party. So those will also help your follower, of course. So in general, the investment is quite high, and for the start you can't really do this, but the investment pays off later on when you're actually just gathering random pieces that have good stats and then the right items with some good rolls. For example, Nemesis Braces here, this is basically perfect with life regeneration and life per hit and physical resistance. So you want some stuff like this basically where they just heal up and this allows them to stay alive. So essentially, while you're progressing your character, you just gather random loot. You start out with the Immortality Relic, and then later on, if you're playing an Enforcer build, you can transition to such a setup where you just get all the skills, which obviously helps. For example, usually you have the Enchantress for a 10% cooldown, but now I also get 10% elemental damage, which is actually, you know, like a 7% DPS increase or so. And since I'm on hardcore, I also have to cheat death usually. So in this case, I also got 6% attack speed for free. Plus another few small things like the erosion spell. So all skills and Enchantress is overall really nice. And as I mentioned, you have the other options here with the Scoundrel, with the cooldown relic for the Knight's Whale. Or I also run an all skills Scoundrel on hardcore because I want to cheat death. The Scoundrel's cheat death is actually incredibly powerful on hardcore, especially because it allows you up to 7 seconds of invisibility and invincibility, similar to Smurf Screen on the Demon Hunter. So essentially, when you die, you proc this, and then as long as you don't take any actions, you will remain invisible for 7 seconds, which is almost a guaranteed chance to survive a disconnect. Because typically you get kicked out of the game after 10 seconds of disconnecting. And if you have a 25k dexterity Scoundrel, 7 seconds of that will already be covered by the spell alone, and then usually have your own she death coming after. So there's almost no chance to die from a disconnect in hardcore when you have a Scoundrel. So this is the main reason why I run with the Scoundrel on my farming builds at least. So for example on my Demon Hunter I've been running with this all the time, and now also on my Witch Doctor I just have the Scoundrel, I juice him up a bit and make sure that I will survive. But typically I would just recommend going the cooldown relic and Knight's Veil. This is like the big highlight here on the Scoundrel, because the other like all skills benefits are incredibly tiny compared to the enchanters. So you get like, you know, some small like, you know, extra shots he has, and then you have this Hysteria, which is pretty bad. So yeah, nothing really does anything here basically, but the Knight's Veil is a big one. And the Templar, yeah, all skills also not really great, but the cooldown relic kind of makes sense on builds that want a lot of healing. And the good part is that for the Templar specifically, cooldown reduction is very valuable because of the healability. It doesn't work on any other follower ability, just on the Templar's heal. So here you want to stack all the cooldown, Captain Crimson, whatever, and if you can, the cooldown relic, and you can get a heal like every 5 seconds. So just imagine this is like reducing a cooldown of your potion to 5 seconds or so. So that can be pretty nice. Lastly, I can also show you how I do this with my stash and with multiple characters and builds on the same character maybe. So first of all, you always need to think about, okay, do we have an Enforcer in our build? Can I go all skills or cooldown, or do I have to go for an invincibility? So that's the first thing you want to check. And then maybe also a Unity. So if you need a toughness from a Unity ring, then you need to have one on the follower, and you need to have one equipped or in the cube for that to actually work. And your follower has to be invincible. So you can't actually run Unity if you have no invincible follower, because your follower will get hit and you will die. And here, for example, I have like a stash tab specifically for follower items. So you see I have like my canes there. I also have my Sage, but I don't really run Sage anymore these days. Like you can never really get rid of all the Death Breath anyway. But typically here I throw in like the good items, you know, like there's a Lowest Crown that you can put on a Templar, for example, to give him like a diamond for extra cooldown reduction, or even a ruby. Like the extra XP also gives you slightly more XP per hour when you're farming solo, which is quite nice. So this is quite useful here. And then I also have things like a few Oculus rings in case I want to build another follower. I have some of these tokens here. I have an Everise band. So these kind of things. And like this, I can just quickly build a new follower if I have to, or when I decide to retire this character for a while, then I just, you know, take off everything here and throw it somewhere into an empty stash tab, and I take it on the next character and equip everything, and I don't need to rebuild the whole character here. So this is also about it for what I have to share here. So to recap a little bit, you want to always have a Flavor of Time and the Nemesis Bracers, and typically Oculus Ring. In T16 you want an Everise band and Cane set, and maybe Sage on your follower as well. You can combine this with a Ring of Fire Grandeur if you want to have both sets. And then you want to get to 25k main stat, and typically with an Immortality relic. But on Enforcer builds, especially in speedruns, it is quite possible to go with cooldown relic or with the all skills relic. So Enchantress is usually the all skills character, and Scoundrel is usually the cooldown character. And like this you can get a bit more out of your follower. If you're going into a push with a non-invincible follower, you really need to juice them up. So you want to have good items, good life recovery, life per hit, life per second. You want to have maybe a mix of like the main stat plus other main stat to give them more armor and auras, maybe a few augments to make sure that they actually survive. So the minimum toughness value you want to shoot for with a follower is maybe something like 200 plus million at least, when you have an Enforcer on your build, to kind of make them survive in a push. And for this you also need a 100 Mutilation Guard and a 100 Esoteric Alteration. And lastly, if you're playing hardcore, then the Scoundrel is extremely good to protect you from disconnects with the 7-second invincibility when you would die. So you can use that especially when farming, and you will generally not lose a character that often when something like that happens. Personally, I've already disconnected 6 times this season and I haven't died from a disconnect yet, so it's quite effective. The overall loss in farming efficiency is rather minor. It's mostly for the push that you really want to optimize your followers to squeeze out this one extra tier or so, especially from the all skills enchanters in most cases, or the cooldown Scoundrel. So these are typically the 2 options there to just get a little bit of a bonus that might help you out. And that also concludes the video. So I actually went quite a lot more into detail than I had originally planned, but I hope that this helps you to maybe juice up your own followers a bit better and make use of those mechanics that I described with all skills and the cooldown. So I wish you good luck with your own season. Hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys next time.